Hey, I'm talking today with AC Fuller. AC, how you doing, man?
Very well. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I'll go ahead and read a little bit of your bio. Let me say that right before we jump into our interview. Once a journalist in New York, AC Fuller now writes fiction at the intersection of media, politics, and technology. Before he began writing full time, he was an adjunct professor of journalism at NYU and an English teacher at Northwest Indian College. In addition to NYU, AC has taught writing for the Pacific Northwest Writers Association, the Write in the Harbor Conference, the Royal City Literary Arts Society, the Bainbridge Artisan Resource Network, and many local libraries. He lives with his wife, two children, and two dogs near Seattle. AC,
I
my
gotta
first.
trim that bio.
Is that old?
No, no, I gotta trim it. It's long.
It
I'm
is
sorry. I
pretty long.
interrupted you on your own podcast.
No, that's all right. But my first question is the Bainbridge Artisan Resource Network. Is that called the Barn? Because if it's
Yeah,
not, they missed out. Okay.
it
Just
is.
one.
Yep, it's called the Barn. But I thought it would be weird in my bio to say that I taught writing at the Barn.
Yeah,
But
I hear you.
yes, the official name is Barn. I don't even think it's the Barn. It's just Barn,
Just Barn.
all caps.
So tell us a little bit about you and your writing. What's not in your bio?
What's not in my bio? Let's see. So, I think the key phrase in my bio is novels at the intersection of media, politics, and technology. And those are really my interests. I write thrillers, I write fiction, and my interests started off in media, journalism, how journalism works, how the current media works, how that is changing with social media, and really has totally changed now. When I started writing, it was just about to totally change, and now that's happened. So, those are my passions: politics, media, and the way technology is affecting them and changing them. And so really all my stories have some element of that in them. And I have two main series, one of which is about a journalist who's solving crimes and always getting wrapped up in murders and crimes and conspiracies. Those are the Alex Vane media thrillers. And then I've got another series called A Meritocracy, which is about a woman who is trying to sort of upend democracy using technology. And so there's not a lot that isn't in my bio because those are the things I think about all the time. Although I am writing a book that's set in the paleontology world that's a thriller also that's a little bit different for me. Something I may have to change my bio to fix because it's not really about politics, media, or technology, that one. But that
Hmm.
one's away from being done.
Interesting. So my first question, and probably the most important question of the show: would you rather fight a horse-sized duck or, let's say, 20 duck-sized horses?
Horse-sized duck or 20 duck-sized horses. I would say probably a horse-sized duck. 20 horses the size of a duck sounds kind of scary to me. I think they could trample me. I think I might be able to outrun a duck if it was horse-sized. I don't think ducks.
Hmm.
I guess if could it fly? That would be dangerous. I'm still going to go with the horse-sized duck.
Okay.
I like little things trampling me, and 20 little horses sounds scary.
Yeah, you
I
think they probably, if you got 20 of them, they're going to start like stacking on top of each other probably, and then
yeah,
you're in real trouble.
yeah, and one giant duck, it just sounds kind of reminds me of Big Bird. It just doesn't have the same visceral kind of I got to get out of here vibe. And I think
Yeah,
I could probably outrun that duck.
totally
So
fair
I'm not
point.
sure though. Neither one sounds good. I'm not especially tough, so
Tell you what, if you want, you can process that for a few minutes and we can circle back to it if
we'll
in a
we could
minute.
just make the whole interview about that and keep going, keep do a deep dive on it. Do 90 minutes on that question.
We could, but we should probably talk about what we're actually here to talk about today. So the show is your favorite thriller, and so I asked my guests to think about their. I have thriller authors come on to talk about their favorite thriller book, and when I put this question to you, you couldn't tell me what your favorite thriller of all time was, but you
Yes.
did say your favorite thriller of this year is Delta V by Daniel Suarez. You want to tell us a
Yeah,
little bit about that book?
I do. Yes, I was just saying my favorite thriller changes by the year. One year I'll read a ton of Lee Child books, and then last year I read a ton of Michael Connolly books, and those I guess they're individual books, but they all kind of run together to me, and it's one big story with 20 books to it. But right now here I'll show you this. I think your viewers will be able to see that. the people listening on the podcast won't. That's the cover. This book is a near future sci-fi thriller, and I don't write sci-fi and I don't read a lot of sci-fi, but this is a kind of sci-fi that is right up my alley because it's near future and it's about politics, technology, and space exploration. So it's about a small team that goes to mine asteroids and send the resources back to Earth in order to take the next step toward moving into space. And it's set in the 2030s. And the reason I loved this book is that it's a little slower than your typical thriller. There's not a lot of chase scenes down dark alleys. There's not a lot of murders, but it's paced like a kind of a slow. It has a lot of tension to it, and because it's the first trip into space on this particular type of ship, and there's a lot of stakes which I won't get into that raise throughout the course of the story, relationships that are threatened, people back on Earth who are threatened. But I loved it because it is very realistic. It's written like it could just be a story of what happens in 2030 or 2035 if guys like Elon Musk keep coming and keep developing with private space exploration. So the reason I loved it, it was just felt fairly realistic, even though it was sci-fi. It's not full of monsters and lightsaber battles and stuff. Nothing against that. It's just that's not what I typically read. But it is very science-based at the same time.
Yeah, I like one of my favorite authors is Max Barry, and he's written a couple of books that are sort of thrillers, sort of realistic sci-fi thrillers. Like I think Machine Man was one of his books. Have you read that one?
I haven't read that, but tell me about it because I love books like that.
It's basically about a guy who loses his limbs, loses either his arms or I can't remember which he loses first, but he loses a limb, and he's an engineer, and he replaces it with a machine, and basically the plot of the book is he becomes addicted to having cybernetic parts, and so he ends up chopping off other limbs to basically become a machine man. And it's a thriller, cool. But it's kind of it's pretty realistic. The science, a lot of the science of it sounds very plausible.
Yeah, I like stuff that just makes me think about our current world, and if sci-fi does that, that does a lot for me.
Mm-hmm.
This is set in the 2030s. That's not very far away. Probably this exact thing won't happen, but stuff like this is coming into our world, and asteroid mining is something that is, while not about to happen, probably might happen in the future, or at least people are exploring it. And so it was an interesting concept for me and something a little bit different.
Can you tell us a little bit about the main character, the protagonist, and what makes that person compelling?
Yeah. So the main character in this, it's interesting. I actually found a lot of the side characters to be the most compelling in this story. It's kind of about, there is one main character, but it's not driven by him in the same way a lot of thrillers are. It's really about a gang of 6 or 8 people who all go through this long process to end up on this ship that's in deep space. And they're all compelling because they just all have unique stories about why they would want to be on this dangerous mission in space. The main character is kind of a loner, no family, guy without a ton to lose. Honestly, he's really not the most compelling figure. I think the antagonist villain is the most compelling figure in this book. And I know that's something that was on your list of potential questions. He's just someone who, if you follow what some of the space exploration billionaires are doing these days, like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and the others who are talking about private space exploration, he seems to be based on them. And he's really the driving force of this book. And he's not a typical villain. He's not out there drowning puppies or anything like that. It's more, he's villainous in a different way than you would see in a lot of thrillers. He's not a sadistic murderer or anything like that. He's got much bigger ambitions than just a murder or two.
So is it more like an ensemble kind of piece where every character gets their own moment to shine?
Yeah. When they're on the ship, there's, I would say maybe 5 or 6 characters who each have unique roles, and it's set in the future, and they've got people from all around the world, men and women, on this ship who all have important roles. And yeah, it's kind of interesting. The main character, it's not like, so I talked about the Michael Connolly books, the Harry Bosch series, which a lot of people are talking about these days because of the television show that's doing so well. That's really driven by the main character. And this book isn't like that in the same way. It's really, I would say, driven by the idea and the setting more than anything else, and the villain.
Hmm. A lot of good thrillers are driven by the villain and
Yeah.
how the hero or heroes react to what the villain is doing. It's pretty classic trope in thrillers, it seems like.
Right, it makes sense. It's a lot of thrillers are based on that, and the villain has some huge plan, and he or she is really the one pushing things, and the hero's got to react.
Hmm. So does from what it sounds like, the book theme kind of sounds like it relates to the dangers of technology. Does that sound right, or did you take something else away from it?
I would say, yeah, not quite the dangers, maybe more the inevitability of the continued expansion of technology and the potential for bad things to happen if it ends up unregulated. Um, Also, one of the themes is just the magic of space exploration and why humans are captivated by that, which I think people have been and really still are. The kind of the magic of what's out there or what could be out there that we don't know about. So
Hmm.
that's the theme, that a lot of the characters at different times are they're the first humans to travel this deep into space. They're the first humans to mine an asteroid. So the magic of that and that potential kind of got to me. I think for people who read a ton of sci-fi, it might not be as unique to them. But since I read mostly thrillers set in the modern present world of crime and cops and things like that, that really got to me, just to be reminded of how much is out there that we don't know. And that's reflected through the characters really well, I would say.
Hmm. I see a lot of. I was just thinking about sci-fi and thrillers, and we see a lot of thriller stuff that has touches of sci-fi that you wouldn't even really think of it as sci-fi, like James Bond and his gadgets,
Yeah,
or the Mission Impossible movies, especially because they always have they have technology in those movies that we certainly don't have now, but they're not futuristic, but we just sort of assume that it's okay for Ethan Hunt to have the I can't think of anything that wouldn't be a spoiler, but like in the most recent movie where they had the like face swapping technology in that Mission Impossible movie.
yes. Yeah, I think you're right about all that. I think there's a lot of thrillers have a kind of, you definitely wouldn't call them sci-fi, but they borrow liberally from kind of near future sci-fi possibilities, I
Hmm.
would say. Even some of my own books, they involve, when you're talking about modern politics and technology and media, there's a lot of hacking involved, there's a lot of computer stuff involved, a lot of social media things involved, and um, it's all pretty much true, the stuff I use in my books, but a lot of it, I take a little bit of leeway with in ways that are kind of similar. Here's the way the technology might go, and I'm just going to say that's the way it is.
Hmm.
So it's a borrowing from sci-fi while I think appealing to people who aren't into sci-fi in general.
And a little, a pro tip that I'm sure you already know: if you make it vague enough, people can't complain about it.
That's probably true. I think, yeah, I've noticed in some of my books, I try to make the technology really clear and precise. And the people who really know technology get annoyed if you get something a little bit wrong.
Hmm.
And the people who don't know about technology mostly don't care.
Yeah.
They don't really care if the hacking is described entirely accurately. They want to know what the result of it was. So that's always an interesting balance to try to strike, how vague to be about it.
Yeah, my father was a doctor, and growing up with him, whenever we would watch something on TV together, if any time there was a medical scene on a TV show, he would always laugh, because they never got it right.
Yeah.
And I thought, do they what do they owe to the accuracy of it? Because most people in the world are not doctors. Most
Right.
people watching the show are probably not going to have any idea the inaccuracies of it. But I don't know. Sometimes it's certainly worth putting out that extra effort to get the accuracy of the terminology and the accuracy of the procedures.
It's
And it's
interesting. It's really true. It's really true of technology too. I've got a book, my third book called The Mockingbird Drive. The central mystery is around this very old disk pack from an old computer that's 50 years old. The
mhm.
original kind of computers that took up a whole room. And there's a disk pack, which is similar to what we would call a hard drive. And so I have one of the characters refer to it as a hard drive early in the book, when technically it's a disk pack, which is a bunch of floppy disks all contained in a plastic container together. And
Mhm.
I get emails about that than I've gotten about anything else in my books from older, mostly guys who say, "You're an idiot. You called it a hard drive. It's a disk pack. No such thing as a hard drive." In that year, IBM didn't make a hard drive then. Blah blah blah. And I call it a hard drive, but described as a disk pack. But yeah, those little things, and most readers don't care, but the ones who care really care, and
Hmm.
it makes some sense. I mean, that's people they like to see you get stuff right that they know about. So I actually try to be really careful about that when I can.
Yeah,
Same with weapons. You get weapons really wrong, and you're going to hear about it as a thriller author.
that's for sure. Yeah, I know that one firsthand. So AC, what book of yours do you want to tell us about today?
Well, I thought I'd tell about my Meritocracy series. This is the first one here. It's called Open Primary. I guess your podcast listeners won't be able to see that, but your video viewers will. This is a book about a woman, and it's actually three books: Open Primary, Off Message, and Echo Chamber, about a woman who's trying to upend the two-party political system using technology. So she uses an online platform to have an open primary in the 2020 election. So she's going to essentially try to work outside the two-party system and allow anyone to run for president on her web-based platform. So imagine it's like American Idol meets The West Wing or something like that. So it's a book for political thriller junkies, but then it brings, of course, social media, technology, and politics together in what turns out to be kind of three-quarters political thriller, maybe one quarter crazy satire, because you can't write about the modern political climate without it just getting really weird. And so it's not about our current exact political moment, but the technology and the social media and the kind of reality show aspect of what we have now is all reflected in these books. And so there's something a little bit different there. And they take place in 2019 and 2020, and they're all about this election that we're currently starting, this election cycle, kind of getting blown up by this woman's crazy idea that, of course, takes off in various ways. And I won't spoil it, but it's a fun series. A lot of my older readers love it. The people who are a little sick of politics are kind of steering clear of this series, but I'm hoping it will get a revival now that we're kind of in the political season again. It's not political in the sense that I try to tell you what to think about politics. It's not like that. It's just the big political storylines, and it's got all sorts of crazy characters who are very much of the modern American moment,
Hmm.
all political persuasions, from communists to far right crazies to moderate types to spiritual teachers like Marianne Williamson. There's one of those in this book who a lot of people are actually writing me saying, "Hey, wait a second, you predicted Marianne Williamson in your book," because there's a character who's a lot like her, and I wrote these a couple years ago. So there's all sorts of interesting characters who come onto the political stage, and it's a fun series.
And Marianne Williamson is an interesting cat. That's all I'll say about it.
Yeah. And there's a character, if you read Open Primary, who's quite a bit like her, who's one of the candidates who registers for president, and is not taken especially seriously for pretty obvious reasons, I guess.
Well, I got to say, American Idol meets The West Wing is a killer log line.
I hope so. Yeah, I mean I think it's confused some people because
Uh
you
huh.
can't see how those would go together. But I wanted to get its politics, but it's the reality show political world that we live in, squared basically. And
Yeah.
I appreciate that. It's a fun series, and a lot of my readers think it's my best work.
Yeah, it sounds interesting. So that was the Meritocracy series. There's currently 3 books in it: Open Primary, Off Message, and Echo Chamber. Is it just a trilogy, or are you working on more books in that series?
It's a trilogy as of right now. I have 3 more books loosely planned, and I don't know when those will be out yet. I've got some other things I need to get out first. But the trilogy is really completes the story. And
Yep.
it's really, there's not more books needed in the series, but there's 3 more books I want to write to continue the story. But it's complete as is.
Gotcha. Okay, and the book that your favorite thriller, at least your favorite thriller of this year, not to make you pick one of your entire life, was DeltaV by Daniel Suarez. And you are AC Fuller. And thank you for coming on the show today, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot for having me.
All
Appreciate
right,
it.
take care.
All right. Bye bye.